We are back with more burning questions from our everydayers. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Hello, everyone. I am Zach Hicks of HorseshoeHuddle.com. You guys know me as your resident film nerd, the architect of the Build a Ballard series, and your go-to draft guy here on the podcast. Jake is unable to join us, but if you guys missed him yesterday, he answered a lot of your guys' burning questions on yesterday's episode, and today I'm continuing what Jake laid down. So we're going to continue going through some of your guys' questions, some of the ones that Jake wasn't able to get to. We're going to talk about, who I would take at 15th overall among a current set of players that you guys are very focused on right now, and I think a lot of Colts fans are focused on right now. And then we're going to talk about the potential for Chris Ballard to surprise us a little bit on draft day. Does he go away from wide receiver or corner or defensive end or whatever it's going to be on draft day and really shock the whole world? And then finally, we're going to conclude today's episode by talking about the archetype needed at wide receiver. Is it going to be a field stretcher? Is it going to be just an all-around guy who can do it all? It's going to be a yards after catch guy. We're going to get to that burning question as well. But to kick us off, we got at Danger B12, who really wanted to get right to it. He said, rank these players on who you would draft if they were available at pick 15. Terrion Arnold, cornerback from Alabama. Brock Bowers, tight end from Georgia. Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver from LSU, Quinyon Mitchell, cornerback from Toledo, and Dallas Turner, pass rusher from Alabama. Really, really good set of players. And realistically, if we're looking at how the draft likely goes, it probably won't be all of these guys available at pick 15. So we're purely living in the hypothetical world right now of who I would take among these very, very, very good prospects here. And I think for me, man, if I'm thinking about what fits what the Colts need the most, I'm thinking someone like Terrion Arnold or Quinyon Mitchell. I go back and forth between those two on who my number one corner is in this class. I like Terrion Arnold's movement ability a little bit more, the lateral ability. But Quinyon Mitchell just has that dog in him. You see it on film. You see it in the way that he attacks out of his zone drops. So I could go either way with those two guys. But I think for me personally, I would go with one of those two guys in this hypothetical world. I love the fit of Brock Bowers. I love the fit of Brian Thomas Jr. And I think Dallas Turner can be a fantastic pass rusher in the NFL. But for me, again, this Colts defense needs a corner. And I got two guys right here on the board in this hypothetical that are fantastic cornerbacks. I mean, Quinyon Mitchell has the potential to be a really, really good corner in the NFL. I think he has, Pro Bowl, maybe even more potential. And Terrion Arnold, maybe he doesn't have the long speed that a Quinyon Mitchell has, but he's so fluid and he's so smooth and he's so physical within the way that he plays that I'm good with either one of ththese guys there. Whatever the Colts need, like, again, Quinyon Mitchell, if you want to shoot for the stars a little bit more, go with Quinyon. If you want the better player currently and the better player, the more likely chance of getting a good player, I think Terrion Arnold's a great pick there. So, it really comes down to what mood I'm in that day, how I'm picking between Arnold and Mitchell. But for me, I think I would go with one of those two guys. It doesn't, I'm not saying that I wouldn't take a Brock Bowers. Obviously, a Brock Bowers at 15 would be fantastic. But, at the end of the day, the Colts offense was very good last year without Anthony Richardson, without a lot of their top players playing. And don't get me wrong, I want to continue adding to that offense. But what is the biggest difference maker in round one of this draft for the Colts? It's a defender and it's a cornerback. And if you get an option of Quinyon Mitchell or Terrion Arnold there at 15, I think you got to run that card in and get one of those two guys. Now, if both those guys are gone and Bowers is on the board or Brian Thomas Jr. is on the board, then it's a different conversation. Then it's okay. It's not the top corner versus the top tight end or anything like that. It's the top tight end versus the tier 2 cornerbacks and Cooper DeJean and Kool-Aid McKinstry and stuff like that. Then I can be talked more into a Brock Bowers type. But if Arnold and Mitchell are there, or just one of those guys is there at 15, I'm all in. Give me one of those guys. Let's roll from there. Let's get that top corner in here, a guy who can play on the backside and play some man coverage, a guy who can be an immediate contributor for this team and can do some really, really good things. So great question there. Really like that question. And yeah, I would go corner, but I could totally see people wanting Bowers or Thomas Jr. or honestly, the Colts might prefer Dallas Turner out of that bunch there. I'm not too sure. But yeah, I would certainly go with one of the corners there at that pick. At Patrick W41 asked quite a few questions in this one, but we love that. We love be redundant, be rambling. That's what I am, guys. I'm someone who speaks without periods and question marks and all that. It just run on sentence. So Patrick, we appreciate it here. Does Bowers not doing anything in terms of RAS measurable? So just like the pre-draft workouts at his pro day, drop his stock with Ballard and the Colts. So to first answer that question, apparently there are some rumors that he did run his 40. I don't know if that's confirmed or not. Albert Breer said that he didn't do anything. This Dogs Daily account, I believe, is what put it out there that Bowers ran a 4.53. If he did run a 4.53, that's great. That's awesome to see. But again, we got to see the confirmation on that. But yeah, I mean, look, when it comes to the relative athletic score that Kentley Platt has put out, he's done a fantastic job with that stuff, with his math bomb stuff or the RAS system. But the Colts don't really believe in that system. That system is more streamlined for us to view and see the pretty numbers compared to 1999 and stuff like that. It's really not that system the Colts view. They just have specific metrics that players need to hit at each position. And yeah, I do think Bowers not really doing much of the testing is a little bit of a factor in the Colts pre-draft assessment of him. Now, does it exclude him from their board? Not necessarily. I mean, they took Dio Adangbo in the top 50, I believe, without doing any pre-draft testing. They took Julian Blackmon in the top 100. They took Malik Hooker, 15th or 16th overall when he didn't do any pre-draft testing either. So it doesn't exclude a player, but you have to be very confident in that player's ability to move, that player's athleticism, and all that stuff to take that shot, especially when, Bowers, even if he is 241 pounds when he actually plays within games, that's still a little bit small for a tight end. It's a bit smaller than the typical tight end. So you need that athletic ability to be top tier. Everything on film says that he can move like a top tier athlete. Like, I'm not discounting the athlete that Brock Bowers is, but you want to check off as many boxes as possible, especially when you're spending a top 15 pick on a guy. So anytime that you miss a check mark on something, it props up other guys that you maybe had graded in a similar tier. So I'm not going to say that it drops Brock Bowers' stock, but it might propel other players above him on the board. Like if they had two guys in a similar tier, someone like a Quinyon Mitchell and a Brock Bowers, and Quinyon's doing every pre-draft test. He's dominating the Senior Bowl. He's killing in the interviews. Bowers, you really only got the interviews and maybe some medical rechecks. Then a guy like Quinyon might just surpass him because of that, because he's giving you every bit of information you need and he's hitting all those boxes that you need. Or Bowers is checking a bunch of boxes and then doing like an unfulfilled on other boxes there. So that's the best way I can really explain it there. It's not necessarily it's not necessarily like, he's going to fall because he didn't test. It's like he's not moving up because he didn't test, if that makes sense there. And then Patrick asked pretty much a similar question we got before from Danger B12, but he asked, who is Ballard taking of those? So Dallas Turner, Quinyon Mitchell, Brock Bowers, all there at 15. Who is Chris Ballard taking? And I think this is a great question because we look at the Ballard types and all three of these guys really do fit the Ballard archetype. Bowers is an athletic pass catcher. Quinyon Mitchell dominating the Senior Bowl, super athlete. Dallas Turner hits every single pass rushing metric. But it really comes down to positional value and where the Colts feel like they need to upgrade in this class. So I think for the Colts, it would come down to Turner versus Mitchell. And honestly, with how Chris Ballard has spent and invested in the edge position in his career, I mean, 6 of his 24 top 100 picks in his career have been on the defensive end position. That's 1 out of every 4 top 100 picks have been an edge rusher. I think I would lead Dallas Turner here. I think Dallas Turner would be that guy for him in this scenario. And I think Dallas Turner might be the only guy that they'd be willing to trade up for in the draft. That's more speculation. Again, that's not me reporting anything, but just by how much Chris Ballard values the trenches and values pass rusher off the edge, and how pressed he has been to get that position right in the draft, I think Turner would be the one guy of this group that would stand out to him if he is really high on Dallas Turner. But coming up, guys, we're going to transition to, could Chris Ballard surprise us in the draft? Is he going to actually go wide receiver or defensive end or corner in round one? Or is it going to be a surprise pick that none of us really see coming? Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Supercharged roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Alrighty, Colts fans, we're back answering more questions. Again, our everydayers sent them all in to our Twitter account at Locked On Colts. If you guys want to participate next time we do a Q&A, please send your questions to at Locked On Colts on Twitter, and we will try to get around to them there. This was one of my favorite ones at my Colts account, Jeremy Stevenson. You guys all love him and know him from Twitter. He asked, if the Colts end up drafting interior defensive line, then linebacker, and then interior offensive line with their first three selections, can you give us your reactions and how fans should take the news? Now, you can even put this in any different way you want. Like if they take interior offensive line in the first round, if they take, again, interior defensive line in the first round, I don't think they could take a linebacker the first round this year. There's just not a linebacker to take. But regardless, if these are the three positions they take with their first three picks without trading back or trading up or anything like that, what are your guys' reactions to that news? And should we be shocked if Chris Ballard were to do that? It's a hilarious question because I don't think it's completely outside the realm of possibility. I personally don't think they take an interior defensive lineman in the top 100, but I could see a linebacker. I could see an interior offensive lineman. They got two interior offensive linemen coming up on contract years. So I could see those positions being taken. But if you're asking for my reaction to that, I would be a little disappointed. I'd be a little bit shocked, because the Colts have clear pressing needs, and Chris Ballard's typically done a good job in his career of at least throwing draft capital at their pressing needs in a given year. But again, I wouldn't put it outside the realm of possibility that, like, hey, Byron Murphy's sitting there at 15. Byron Murphy is the only blue player left on the board, and they go Byron Murphy, and then round two rolls around. They're looking at the board and Edge Cooper is their highest rated player. And they're like, okay, cool. Let's get Edge Cooper in here. And then, again, in round three, you're looking at centers or guards for the future. And you grab a Mason McCormick, Brandon Coleman, or Hunter Norzad, whoever it's going to be there in round three. And you just roll with those guys. And then at the end of the day, you're looking back being like, oh my gosh, how did we not take a corner wide receiver? I mean, Jeremy's question here, part of his question was, how would fans take the news, or how fans should take the news? I think, again, it depends on the players taken, but I do think you should be a little bit annoyed. I know how fans will take the news, and it will be not good, not good whatsoever with those selections there. So Jeremy, I mean, you're getting everyone ready to get their torches out and everything here with that question. I wouldn't, there's a way that I wouldn't hate it, but I probably would hate it. I probably would hate it right there. So, that's my answer to that question. I probably would hate it. There's a scenario where I don't, because like if they take like Johnny Newton from Illinois in the first round, like he's one of my favorite players. I have him as a blue player in this draft. I would be a little disappointed, but it would be like my reaction to the Jonathan Taylor pick a couple years ago, where it's like, okay, I would have taken someone else that's not a running back / in this one, defensive tackle. But I think that player is going to be so good that I don't really care. Like it's fine for me. So that's kind of my reaction to that one right there. We're talking some more surprises here. We got Kyle Winslow here saying Chris Ballard said that he has a position in mind in this year's draft. What is your best guess as to that position? And then knowing this, why did Zach Hicks still pick a defensive end in his latest mock draft? I love this question because, you know, Chris Ballard does kind of give us hints throughout the draft season when he does talk about which way he's going in the draft. It's not these very obvious hints, but when you're looking back in hindsight and using that hindsight bias that we all know and love, you can kind of say, oh yeah, okay, there's where he said it right there. There's where he said it. So when Kyle asked this question, Ballard said he has a position in mind. When he says he has a position in mind, it's not necessarily like set in stone, like, oh my gosh, I know for a fact I'm going corner in round one. But then what if the 2 or 3 guys that you had circled in round one all go before your pick? Then you're not going corner in round one at that point. You can have a good feel for it. You can have a good feel for which guy you're going or which position you're going, but you have to have contingencies in place when it comes to the draft because you never know what's going to happen. I mean, the best example I can think of is years ago when I was covering Washington still. I remember the Giants were set. They were like, okay, we're going to take Brandon Sheriff in the first round in the top 10. Brandon Sheriff's our guy. There's nobody else on our board. It's all Brandon Sheriff. And then Washington, like 2 picks ahead of them, takes Brandon Sheriff. And the Giants panicked and they took Eric Flowers there in the top 10, and that didn't work out for them. So you have to have contingencies in place. And I think really when it comes to the Colts in this one, I think they're going into this first round with a couple positions circled. I think wide receiver is in play. I think corner is definitely in play. And I think edge rusher is in play. Those are all positions that could use an upgrade this next season, could also use an upgrade for the future. And depending on which player is there, you're going to go with one of those guys. So when I took defensive end in this latest mock draft, I traded back in that mock draft. You guys can read it on horseshoehuddle.com. It was one of 2 mock drafts I'm going to release this offseason, like official mock drafts. But yeah, I traded back and I took Jared Verse from Florida State. And for me, again, when it comes to the Colts, I think at 15, they have a couple players circled, guys like Mitchell and Dallas Turner and Brock Bowers. But there's a very, very realistic chance that those guys are not going to be there at 15. So then you get into the trade out scenario where, you're moving back to 20 or 21, 22, whatever it's going to be. And then you have a new group of players that you have circled. You have your Brian Thomas Jr.'s, your Xavier Worthies, you have Jared Verse, those type of guys. Cooper DeJean, I think, would be in there. You're circling those guys and you're picking among those guys there. So again, Chris Ballard could have had a player in mind like a Quinyon Mitchell or Terrion Arnold or both those guys. But if they're not there at 15, you can't still pick them. And then you have to go to your contingencies. And one of those contingencies is always a trade back. So in my mock draft, I predicted the Colts to have to go to those contingencies, move back to 20, and take Jared Verse, a defensive end who fits a lot of what they need. And I know that they like defensive end in this class. So yeah, I that's what I did in my mock. Again, I don't know which position he was talking about there. I think that he's very high on wide receiver in this class. I think he's very high on corner, especially early. And I think they want to go defensive end in the top 100 picks. But I don't know who he was kind of talking about there. That's a great question because it puts me on the spot there, and I'm not exactly too sure. But I went defensive end because I was predicting that contingency of the trade back. That's what I thought they would do, and I still think that's a very realistic option for the team. But it's one of many options. There's so many options that could happen. When you're not picking in the top 5 like you were last year, you're preparing for multiple scenarios. You're not preparing just for the one scenario where, last year the Colts had like 2 or 3 contingencies where it's like, okay, Richardson's likely going to be there. If the Texans pull a fast one on us and take Richardson, we'll get Stroud. If somehow the quarterbacks go top 3, we'll move back and get Levis later. They were ready for those things. But at 15, it's 30 contingencies. It's, so many different scenarios that can happen that you have to be prepared for all those things there and have clusters of players that you're looking into rather than just like 2 or 3 guys like the Colts were last year. But great question, Kyle. I love that you put me on the spot there and made me have to ramble about, a lot of my answers to it there. So great question and just the perfect one for this Q&A session. Coming up, though, we're going to shift our focus more to wide receiver with our next question and talk about the difference between a field stretcher wide receiver and just more of that traditional, like do-it-all type guy, which one the Colts would prefer in this type of class. All right, everyone. Everyone's favorite Twitter account at ViveJones007, Kenny Kasenko, did a great job, memeing his way through every draft season there on Colts Twitter. He asked, would an offense featuring Michael Pittman Jr. and Rome Odunze condense the field too much? Does a field stretcher better unlock things deep and open things up underneath? I think that's a great question. I think it's a fantastic question because we're not, when you're building a basketball team, I always like to use other sports as my reference when I'm talking about football. I think it just brings everyone together there. But like when you're building a basketball team, do you want 5 guys who are all elite at attacking the rim? 5 guys who are just elite getting to the paint, drawing fouls, scoring in tight. That's a great thing to have. Having 5 guys who can do that makes your team good. But would you rather have that, or would you rather have 5 guys with differing skill sets? Would you rather have 5 guys where, one's a dominant post player, one's a great 3-point shooter who can space it out, one's a great defender who can also pass on offense? You have those mixing personalities that unlocks every area of the game where it's like, okay, now we need a 3-point shot. When you have the 5 guys who are great at going at the basket, who's shooting that 3-pointer? Where the other team that's more complete and has guys who can fill every role, you have the guy who's ready to shoot that 3-pointer. So to kind of answer what Kennan's asking here, do you want just another Pittman type guy? And it doesn't even have to be a Rome Odunze. It can be an Xavier Legette we're talking about, who has a little bit more juice than Pittman, but he's still more of that intermediate underneath guy. It can be a Malachi Corley. It can be an AD Mitchell to a degree. I think Mitchell can get a little bit more vertical, but it can be like an AD Mitchell type. Do you want those types of guys, or do you want your Xavier Worthies? Do you want your Troy Franklins? Do you want those guys who can get vertical, beat teams deep, and open up the field so Pittman can work in the intermediate and Downs can work in the underneath in the slot stuff? I think that's a little bit more valuable to me. Now, would I hate a Rome Odunze at like 9 or 15 or wherever it is if the Colts trade up or if they stay at 15? Absolutely not. Look, at the end of the day, if we're talking about, again, if we're going back to the basketball reference, would you rather have multiple guys who are elite at getting to the paint and scoring, or just not having multiple of them, just having one and still an incomplete team? I'd still rather have the 2 elites. But I think having that more complete versatile attack on offense is so much better for your team than having a bunch of guys who do the exact same thing. You can survive with 2 guys who do the same thing. Look at the Rams last year with Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. Like, those guys are very, very similar receivers. Puka can get a little bit more vertical, but for the most part, they're both intermediate beaters who can win over the middle of the field. And they were still a great offense, but at the end of the day, I want guys who can do it all. I want guys who can do multiple things or can do just their one thing super well, which opens up for the other guy. So having Pittman, who is this yards after catch, over the middle of the field, tough receiver who can get those tough yards for you, who can dominate in the RPO game, having Downs, who's your quick win slot receiver that you could put on an island, and then having an Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas Jr., Troy Franklin, who can just take the top off of defense and open things up for the other 2. I think that's immensely valuable for what the Colts want to do. It's immensely valuable for what Shane Steichen wants to do with his vertical passing attack. So, again, gun to my head, Kenan, I would definitely say I want the field stretcher over the do-it-all type. Now, again, I think Rome Odunze can do more than just the underneath stuff like Pittman. I think he can get more vertical than a Pittman can. I think he can do some of the vertical stuff, but I think a better fit for this offense would be the Worthy, Thomas Jr., or the Troy Franklins, especially when you have Anthony Richardson's arm. I mean, look, you have to cover 70 yards of grass both ways, 70 yards back and then 50 yards to the side. Like, you have to cover so much grass with Anthony Richardson as your quarterback. Now, if you give him a guy like, again, Troy Franklin, Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas Jr., you actually have to cover all that grass. With Gardner Minshew, you didn't have to cover all that grass. But when you have the speedster plus Anthony Richardson, you have to cover all that grass and be aware of it, which opens the field for the Pittman Juniors and the Josh Downs of the world to be more productive. So, yes, to answer your question, Kenan, I definitely think a field stretcher would be a better fit in this offense than again, I don't want to say a Odunze, but just more of like another Pittman type. I love Michael Pittman Jr. I would put 11 of them on offense because, I love Pittman Jr., but I think diversifying your attack on offense is the way to go. And just adding different types of players in your wide receiver room is the way to go on offense. That's the way I've always believed football should be played. You got to have different archetypes out there on the outside, and then backups who also fit those archetypes. So you have, you can have a rotation of guys, you can have replacements if injuries happen. And you can just still attack teams with that different variety of skill sets. So great question, Kenan. I love that question so much because it's about team building and it's how I would build an offense. I would build an offense with different skill sets and guys who succeed in different ways to maximize what my offense can do. So again, great question there. Love it. At Matthias Dahl, I think it's Matthias Dahl 1993. Please yell at me if I got that wrong. He said, would you draft Quinyon Mitchell / Taron Arnold at I'm assuming at 15, and then trade up and pick Xavier Worthy, or we'll add Troy Franklin in there too, just for redundancy with all that stuff that we were just talking about. Look, you guys know I am team trade back. I love trading back. I love accumulating assets, but if you already got that corner at 15, especially with the way that I feel about day 2 of this draft, I'd be all for moving up from 46 to the late 20s if it's possible to get the receiver that you want. Again, it doesn't have to be a Worthy. It can be AD Mitchell, Troy Franklin, Brian Thomas, whoever it is that you really want there in the 20s. Yeah, I'm all for it. Go get your receiver. Like, get that corner figured out if you can at 15. Again, don't force it if you don't have to. If Quinyon's there, take him, be happy. You got your corner. We're good. But if you see Worthy there at like 28 or 29 and you really feel like he can unlock this offense, go get him. I mean, 3rd round pick, be damned, whatever it is there. It doesn't matter. Go up and get Worthy and feel good that, hey, we got a weapon for our offense. We got a weapon for our defense. If we have to trade back and accumulate more assets, we can. But like, yeah, I'm all for it. If that's your guy, go get him. If you have Worthy as a blue player, we talk about this a lot, blues and red players, where reds are helpful players to your team. Blue players are the difference makers and the true, Pro Bowl potential, whatever you deem it to be. If you're sitting there at 46 and, you're like, I don't really love day 2 of this draft. We have 46, we have 82, we can see what we can do with that. But you're looking at the draft board and your last blue player is still there at 28, 29, and you have an opportunity to go get him. Yeah, go get him. Go get them. Go get your blues. Search for your blues. Get your blues in here and go from there. But only do that if you really feel like Worthy or Franklin, whoever, is a blue player. Don't make this trade out of desperation. Like, oh, we just need this speedster right now. Like, don't do that. But like, if you truly feel that Worthy is a blue, go get him. Go get your blues, especially if you got corner figured out at 15. Like, if you got Quinyon Mitchell or Taron Arnold at 15, you're feeling good. Your defense is looking a lot better because you got one of the 2 better corners in the class. And then you can splurge a little bit. You can do your little cheat day that you do after a good exercise. So go up and get Worthy, get him into your offense, and just roll from there. So yeah, again, if Worthy is a blue player for you, and I think for a lot of us he is, because I feel like I've convinced a lot of you guys that Worthy's a good player, go up and get your blue, but only if you view him as a blue player there. Another great question. Thank you again, Matthias, there. And I think that's all we have time for today. I didn't get to every single question I had in front of me because I'm a long-winded talker, but we'll keep doing Q&As. Again, if you guys want your Q&A questions answered here on the show, remember to go to @LockedOnColts and just send your questions whenever. It can be any day of the week. It can be DMs. It can be a response to something. We love your questions, and we'll try to work them into the show whenever we get a chance. But every day, you guys are killing it this draft season. We're loving it. Keep sending the questions our way. Before I get out of here, though, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. It's going to redirect to that channel here right after we're done. And also, guys, I do want to remind you that the Indy Draft Guide is now here. For $9.99, you guys can get access to the essential piece of reading for Colts fans both before and after the draft, featuring 225 in-depth scouting reports, features, and much more. Click the link in the show notes to order today. If you guys were confused about any of the players I was talking about today, make sure you're purchasing the Indy Draft Guide so you know exactly what I'm saying. And again, if you guys don't already, make sure you're following @LockedOnColts, @JakeArthurNFL, and @ZachHicks2, all on Twitter. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube where we list your podcast. We love your guys' ratings and reviews, and we'll catch you guys back here on the show next week.